to my course today, Culture Club or Culture Class. 3 practices that maintain company culture through change. I'm Kelly Tinnen. Thanks again for coming today. I appreciate it. Let's go ahead and jump right in to our content today. So the first question I really have for everybody is, and you can drop this in the chat, when you think of culture, what is that in terms of an organization? When you think of culture, what does that mean to you? What does that word mean? What things come to mind? You can drop this in the chat, you can unmute, whatever works for you. Yeah, the social environment. So our social environment. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe a vision or something we're all collectively working towards. Yeah, those are all great. Those are all great.
Yeah, I was going to
say the culture too. I'm having trouble with my chat here, so that's why here we go. Okay.
No problem. Go ahead, Michelle.
And I would veer to Keith as well. I was going to say vision, but I think that to me, culture is literally based off of how you handle interactions, right?
Sure.
Values, how values play into your interactions. People and backgrounds. That's perfect. Yes.
Absolutely. People and backgrounds. Absolutely. So again, if you're just joining us, the question is kind of, in your words, what is culture? We've got social environment, values, people and their backgrounds, kind of what we maybe collectively work towards. So when you think of culture, how important, I'm going to launch a poll here for everybody. How important do you think company culture is when it comes to the work that you do? Is it important? Somewhat? Nah, I'm good. Very important. Yeah, for most everybody, the culture is going to be very important. As you can see there, I'm sharing those results with everyone. Culture is really important. When we spend so much time at work and with our work team, it is really important. What about change? What is change when it comes to culture, when it comes to an organization? What is change? How would you define that? You can drop that in the chat. You can unmute and speak up, whatever works for you. I hear feverish typing.
Pose that question again for me, Kelly. I'm sorry.
Change. When you think of change from in an organizational perspective, what does that mean? What do you think of? What terms come to mind? Maybe for me, maybe disruption, reorganization, absolutely, restructuring, different backgrounds. Some like it, some fear it. Yeah, and we'll dive into that a little bit and what the impact of that change can have on organizations. And so as we talk about change, we know change is evident. So we had a lot of change last year, which some of us maybe are trying to forget, but COVID caused or was the result of a lot of change in organizations, many in the way that we do business. Many are now have been working from home for a year. And I think businesses are now looking at ways people are really liking working at home. People, maybe they have found are more productive working at home. And businesses and employers are trying to find out new ways of doing business. The restaurant business, maybe there's some new ways that we can accommodate some of the changes that have happened over the last year and going forward, because we're really not turning back the clock and going back. There's been changes in technology, changes in the way that we learn. Mobile learning is really up and coming in terms of how people can learn things, not just from their computer in an asynchronous environment, but even on their mobile device while on the go. Amazon has been following us around online for a long time now. So you look at those sheets online and they're now following you everywhere. Analytics. artificial intelligence, technology changes are really impacting the way that we do business. I was listening to a webinar last week, and they were discussing how they may use data analytics at some point to help people with their career and professional development. And so I thought that was really fascinating in the way that data and analytics may be used in the future, not just to help us learn, but to help organizations be more productive. And then what about the workforce as a whole? Something very unique. We've got 5 generations working in the workforce today. And our up and comers are really the Gen Z group. So Gen Z group are younger up and comers, just kind of graduating high school, getting into college. Some are just kind of getting out and getting into the workforce. And what things do they value? Purpose in their work. They want to align themselves with a company culture and a vision that they can support and be a part of. They honor flexibility. And so how is the workforce, how are businesses and organizations going to work towards working with those particular groups to create a robust workforce? And so that culture is really going to define what your business is to your consumers, but also to your employees. And so we've talked about change, and I use the word disruption, which the word disruption is a little harsh, I think, but it can be disruption. But we also talked about what else everyone thinks about change: restructuring, reorganizing, shaking up, challenging. But there's also evolution, evolving. And so change in the context of corporate or organizational change could be all of those things. May disrupt or shake up or evolve in the way that we're doing business, which I think is what we're seeing a lot of today. Now, a shift in culture, if not handled delicately, could impact our returns, right? Our returns maybe in the form of employee engagement, performance, or bottom line. And so when we talk about change today, some of the key things that come to mind are often changes in technology, management changes and what that disruption can look like, and environmental changes. That's something that's really close to us today because we had a lot of environmental changes in 2020. The interesting thing about change, when we think of it in terms of organizational or corporate changes, 54% of organizations have not addressed change very well. But if you had to guess, how many organizations have gone through some sort of change, even in the last couple of years? If you had to guess a number, just drop it in the chat what you guys think. Yeah, 100%. Keith said almost there. 92%. Based on a study about organizational change from the Association for Talent Development, 92%. So really pushing that 100% mark of organizations have experienced some sort of change in the last year, in the last 3 years. Yeah, absolutely. Due to the pandemic, almost all organizations had to shift, had some sort of change, had some sort of disruption. And so what's the cost of change to an organization? If you had to think, if you were part, and most of us are part of some sort of organization, what's that cost? What does it cost you? What can it cost you if not managed well? Even if managed well, there are costs. Ooh, yeah, loss of trust. I'm going to circle back on that. Money. Good employees, totally. Money, Amanda said. All of these things, loss of trust, absolutely. So in loss of trust, your employee engagement may plummet. Your employee performance may suffer in terms of turnover, in terms of their overall production and quality of work. Money, that all equates to financial loss in some way. Absolutely. Security is a big thing. People want to feel secure and feel comfortable in their job. Time. So these all also encompass time. Employees not being engaged in their work, employee performance, all can be a sense of loss of time or can be wasted time. And then, as you guys have mentioned as well in the chat, we've got cost of our people, loss of employees, loss of good employees, loss of that security, engagement and productivity, absolutely. The loss of trust. Those are big things. And a lot of those are really hard to get back once they are lost. And so the cost of change and the cost of disruption can be really huge. So let's take a look at culture. Culture, as defined here, a shared vision is why we collectively do what we do for an organization. So I want to think about a company you work for, maybe a company you have worked for, maybe one you admire, maybe a former organization that you have worked for. And let's think of, just brainstorm for a second and think of a few benefits and challenges. I'm going to type those out here. Hopefully I spelled those right. Sometimes when I'm in a hurry, my spelling suffers. So think about the benefits and challenges you have experienced as it relates to culture in your organization. And you can drop these in the chat, and some of these you've already mentioned. So what are the benefits to an organization when an organization is experiencing good culture, good, robust culture? What are some things that you see maybe as management, that you see maybe as employees in that organization? Because that energy really spreads top down, so to speak. So a couple of benefits that maybe you would see as a result of positive culture. Yeah, independence. Yeah, that's great. Being independent or having the ability to make decisions independently. Flexibility. Flexibility, I really value flexibility. Let's do a couple more here. Customer service. Almost couldn't spell customer there. Customer service. Yeah, so that energy is portrayed onto customers, and so it's really excellent, and customers feel that result. Anything else? Yeah. Ability to move up, professional development. What about some challenges when your company culture is suffering? What are some challenges that may be experienced by employees, maybe by management, stakeholders, etc.? Budget. Maybe there's some budget constraints. Competing schedules. Competing schedules. Yeah, absolutely. Not taking risks. I like that, Keith, because sometimes in an organization, we have to take risks to try new things and to innovate and to evolve. And so that impacts culture, definitely. Not meeting expectation. Yeah, so meeting client expectations, maybe that's suffering. Maybe the client organization relationship is really suffering there. Those are all great. We're going to revisit that. as we continue through. So lots of benefits, lots of challenges there, things that can come up when we've got good cohesive culture versus culture that may be suffering a little bit. And so I want to take a look at a business case here. So we've got this company. Who is it? Who is the company we're going to talk about?
Kodak.
Kodak. I feel like I should break into a Paul Simon song, which I won't do.
A Kodak moment.
A Kodak moment. Yes, you said it. So one of their slogans, Kodak moment, share moments, share life, really ingrained in our culture. So Kodak was at one time, actually the largest manufacturer of film equipment. They were founded in the late 1800s and were really kind of prevalent in the marketplace until 2012, but we'll talk more about that. At one time, how much market share do you think Kodak had?
About 75%.
More, almost 90%.
Wow.
Almost 90%, which is crazy. But Keith said it, Kodak moments, share life. Kodak was in everybody's homes. Well, there were some things that came about that really caused Kodak's culture to be shaken a bit, and some change in consumer change that forced Kodak to try to make some changes. So as Kodak went about their business, so they had somewhat of 90% market share. They were really hot and prevalent in the market through the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, but some things started to happen. One of these things had to do with mental models and bias. So if you're familiar with mental models, this is a concept that comes from Peter Senge, who's the author of The Fifth Discipline. And mental models, I equate very similar to being bias. And so bias is a lot of things, but sometimes bias and mental model can be the ability to not be able to see outside of our own walls, so to speak. And so as Kodak was evolving into the marketplace, things were changing. Polaroids were coming out, color film before that, and then the digital market, which really changed the playing game. And Kodak didn't want to go digital. They were really resistant to the digital market. Their CEOs couldn't imagine. Yes, they also competed with Xerox. They couldn't imagine a world that didn't have film. Now, our world still has film, but it looks very different. One of the things that was interesting about Kodak is, first, they had 7 organizational restructures in about a 10-year period. So if you are an employee of Kodak and you are experiencing 7 organizational restructures in 10 years, what are you feeling as an employee? Some of these things that have already been mentioned, Keith said trust. We had stability. Probably not a lot of that going on with that much restructuring in 10 years. Most of their CEOs had a manufacturing background, a strong manufacturing background. The issue was, could they see outside their own bias and their own mental model with what was going on in the marketplace? Were they looking outside their own lens to innovate and grow if we're constantly bringing in people from the manufacturing background? Something to think about. Fujifilm, so competition started to get fierce. As Michelle said, they competed with Xerox, so they were competing in other in other types of markets. Fujifilm in the 50s and 60s started to enter the marketplace, and they were producing film cheaper than Kodak could. And so they were having a problem competing with them. And part of that was because they didn't take them seriously. And they were forced out of the Polaroid market in the 90s. They got into a patent infringement case. So they kind of got into a little headbutting case or situation with Polaroid, and actually had to pull out of that market completely because they lost a patent infringement case. So they couldn't get out of their own way. Mental models and bias were really at play because they couldn't get out from under their own feet, get out from under their own way to see a bigger picture and to see other things that might have been going on. So were these problems that could have impacted their time, money, and people, or were there impacts because of this on time, money, and people? Yeah, I see head shaking. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Kelly, there's a side note there too, that in some cases the consumer locked into a certain vision of something. And since you're talking about film, Polaroid, which we think of as the instant film and instant camera, when they did that and it came out, they went into the film process for a while of rolled 35 millimeter, like you've got on your screen.
Mm-hmm.
And the consumer couldn't accept it.
Yeah.
They viewed Polaroid as the instant, and now you're selling me a canned roll of film that I had to take the pictures and then have them shipped for development.
Yes, you're absolutely right, and I read that too. Henry Ford had an interesting quote that ties right into that, and it was in the Management Mess to Brand Success book, and it was something along the lines of, if I waited, the quote was, if I waited for the consumer to tell me what I wanted, then I would have been waiting, or I would have been looking for a faster horse. But they weren't necessarily listening to their customer either. Their customer was over here saying, this is what we want, this is what we want, but they weren't incorporating what their customer was telling them they wanted. What about psychological safety? So do we think that there could have been some issues with psychological safety going on? And so this term can be a little bold, I think. And what psychological safety really means is it's a term coined by Amy Edmondson, who is a professor at Harvard. And it basically, what it means is the ability to make mistakes and to share ideas without being shamed or having repercussion. It doesn't mean that we're in an environment where we overshare and we have no boundaries. So if you had to think in terms of psychological safety and communicating with organizations, what do you think is one of the top skills that employees felt they needed when change was happening in an organization? Communication. Communication was top. Just communicate with me and tell me what's going on. What sorts of things can communication build within an organization? Many of these you've already said. Trust, yeah. You again, going back to, that's like core, Keith, trust. And what I say will be accepted, even if I don't agree. Like, even if I'm not agreeing, that I'm still able to express those ideas. Reassurance, involving employees in the decision making. Yeah, absolutely. Trust, vulnerability, and authenticity. Being vulnerable. Leaders don't have all the answers, but being vulnerable and having the ability to say, you know what, I don't have all the answers. We're going to figure this out together. Or how can we all get involved in making this decision? And so some of the things that were going on at Kodak is stakeholders weren't very excited about going digital as the digital footprint was starting to take place. Stakeholders weren't very excited about it, but neither were middle managers. Middle managers were digging their feet in because they saw high costs, they saw loss of jobs, and there wasn't a lot of communication going on together to really find a solution. So they were concerned with high costs, they were concerned with loss of jobs, but what was the ultimate cost? We're going to talk about that.
Market share.
Yeah, their ultimate cost was market share. It kept dwindling, and so what really happened was the inability to adapt. So how do we look at stable adaptability? How do we adapt to market shifts and changes with some stability? So how do we do that over time so we're not having to make that hard right turn to make those changes? So what happened is Kodak was a little bit late to the game. They didn't adapt. Executives couldn't see this world without film. They weren't listening to their customer. And like Keith said, then they developed the role of film that you had to kind of be hands-on with, and people weren't into that. I don't want to be hands-on with this. I want my photos immediately. Middle managers furthered that resistance because of high costs. Well, we're going to have to build new plants. We're going to have to adapt our facilities. People are going to lose their jobs. So because of this, they then had a lot of lawsuits that forced them out of smaller markets. They were scrambling to find a fit in the marketplace. They got into printers. Yeah, absolutely, Keith. Test markets, beta test first, try, and if it doesn't work, move on. Absolutely. They were really reluctant to do that. The inability to adapt and to really adapt over time forced the 131-year-old company, Kodak, which was really still today. I mean, Keith even said it when we showed the Kodak picture. It was like, oh, Kodak moment. It's ingrained in us. They filed bankruptcy in 2012. What was the cost? So they were worried about cost and jobs when trying to adapt. But the ultimate cost, $6.8 billion in debt, loss of jobs, 47,000 jobs, and really the loss of a market icon. So what are some ways that companies can be agile and can really adapt to new environments? Keith said one here: test markets, beta test, try. If it doesn't work, move on. Does anything else come to mind in terms of adaptability? Maybe some of the things that you're dealing with. One thing that comes to my mind is adaptability. We've got those 5 generations in the workforce, and we've got those up and comers, Gen Zs. How are employers going to adapt to really meet the needs of those up and coming employees so that we can meet in the middle and work together? Yeah, look at what the competition is not doing and looking there. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. What is the consumer saying? Or looking ahead, going back to that Henry Ford quote, looking ahead. The consumer would have asked me for a faster horse. Well, what's coming on the horizon that maybe we can look at? Yeah, taking risks, absolutely. Sometimes we have to take risks, and risks are costly. Risk can cost money, risk can cost time. And we have to be willing to fail.
Which is interesting, Kelly, because culturally today we have risk avoidance,
Yeah.
much more than we have risk acceptance to try. We fail, that's okay.
Yeah. And why do you think that is?
I think some of it is even actually our educational system, our school system has produced where in order to get a grade, I must succeed and I must be good. In some cases, some models of education, I must be good at everything.
Yeah.
The fact that I may not be skilled in math, but may be skilled in humanities or verbal capabilities or whatever is a factor. Or maybe I'm musically inclined, those kind of things. And so I don't do as well in some of the other areas. And we have this kind of process. And we also have a culture where some of the children that are raised that there has to be a win. So.
Yeah. And that's very interesting. And so that can have impacts. Because those individuals are going to be in the workforce one day if they're not already starting to trickle into the workforce. And how can companies adapt to that sort of mindset, or how do we work within those specific confines so that businesses can continue to operate and can continue to innovate? So it's a very big picture concept. Absolutely. So going back to our brainstorming here. I want to formulate some goals around mental models, psychological safety, and adaptability. So thinking about mental models for a second, or bias for a second, as a manager or leader of an organization, or even as an employee in an organization, what can you do to recognize bias or old mental models that may be milling around there in our heads that may be preventing us from adapting or innovating, or maybe impacting some of that change that's going on? So what are some tips or skills you would use to help identify and turn the curve, so to speak, on some of those mental models? One thing for me, I'll start it off, self-reflection. I've tried to do this a lot more and asking myself the question, what lens am I looking at this through?
Well, you mentioned too, being willing to be vulnerable, to show that you don't know everything, that you maybe have a skill that you think is probably expected of you.
Yeah, and that one's hard too, vulnerability, because, and I'll admit it too, especially in the teaching world, you want to know everything, but we don't know everything, and being okay with that, and vulnerability really does help build trust. Showing past products.
Yeah, I was thinking of an example where, for example, cell phones and how cumbersome they were, and also cost structure, and how that has changed, and how we expect things to be very innovative on our cell phones on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And if we put that model against other things that happen in our culture and our environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember seeing a video of the first cell phone that came out, and it was like this huge box that somebody had to install in a car, and now I can do everything on my cell phone. Amazon even tells me what I need on my cell phone. Absolutely. I love that quote there. The only person that likes change is a baby. That's great. What about psychological safety? So what as a manager or a leader, or even an employee working with other peers, what can we do on our team to help our team have more of an ability to communicate, to express ideas and concerns? How can we improve that team communication? How can we improve team feedback?
So I'm going to go back to including your employees in decision making.
Yeah.
To them about the change, talking to them about what's going on or what you're thinking about, or get their input.
How is that valuable to you, Michelle?
Because
Sorry,
I know
Pandora's box there.
I know the processes, for instance, in my department, I know the processes of my department, but
Yes.
others do not. And so when they start to make decisions that impact my daily operations, yet they don't know anything about them, obviously it causes issues.
Sure.
And it affects my trust and my security, my job security, my social security, all of that. Social security. Okay, I didn't mean that. Not in the federally funded.
It might in some way, but yeah, but absolutely, it impacts trust and security. I mean, those, like, in terms of our hierarchy of needs, right? Those are like fundamental. So yeah, absolutely.
And not being rigid. Some cultures are, and business environment cultures are very rigid in their thinking. So they have, there was a part of childhood development, and Kohlberg was one of the authors that showed this model where some people, you go through these stages, and one of the stages is stage 2, and some people never get out of stage 2. And not to offend anybody, but stage 2 thinkers do very well working at the Department of Motor Vehicle. It's a very rigid environment, and it's a lockstep, and there are no real exceptions, and thinking outside of the comfort level. And there are a lot of companies that are like that, where they hire people for creative ideas, and those people get fired very early on because they can't deal with the lockstep environment.
Yeah, I 100%. I get that. What about adaptability? What are some ways that we can slowly integrate adaptability into our organizations? So some examples, one that comes to mind for me, the hybrid working, that I think is going to be more of a cultural norm than it used to be. What are some other things that come to mind? Find out how the person works best and go that direction. So that's great. That reminds me of another book, actually the Unconscious Bias book by Franklin Covey. The author of the book talks about that. Instead of trying to, like you mentioned, Keith, in terms of being rigid, trying to fit people into these pre-made holes, why aren't we finding out what conditions work best for the person and going in that direction? Find out what works best, person, and go with it. Yeah, absolutely. So wrapping up here, how can we measure the return on investment? So those are likely to measure things, are more likely to visualize or to see their return. So maybe in terms of employee engagement, we may look at turnover numbers. We may look at absenteeism or productivity. Are those numbers going up, improving? Are they staying the same? Are they decreasing? Customer satisfaction, absolutely. What are our customers saying? What are those we serve? What are they saying? And time. Is our production increasing, decreasing? And money, we may have to, turnover, absolutely. And in terms of financially, we may have to make some investments. We may have to invest. We may have to have some risk and failure. But long-term, are they paying off? We might have to test some of those markets, like Keith said. Yeah, turnover costs big time. Absolutely. It does. It costs a company, not just in time, but it costs companies financially. It can cost them in their output, in their productivity. So it is a big cost factor. So yeah, in the end, we want to measure our return on investment. What's our engagement look like? What's our customer saying? Are we meeting our customer needs? Have we decreased turnover? Are people really experiencing those benefits? Independence in decision making, the flexibility. How are people feeling? Is there a sense of trust? Is there a sense of stability in the organization? Any final thoughts? Lots of good information. Yeah, has productivity improved? Absolutely.
If you look at companies that have, the best rating to work there, why is that? What caused that? And much of what we've discussed here, that employees feel trusted, they feel safe in their jobs, they feel valued, even if their idea isn't accepted.
Sure.
That they were valued in being able to express it.
Yeah, absolutely. We were valued and we were safe to express that idea. And the feedback that we received about it wasn't given in such a way that we're never gonna share those ideas again. Maybe it wasn't an idea that we were able to implement. But yeah, absolutely. Valued. We were valued at the core. So I want to thank everybody for attending today. It's great to see some familiar faces. Just to let you know, you guys know who I am, but I'm Kelly Tinnen. I'm the owner of Kelly Tinnen Consulting. I'm a learning and development consultant here in New Mexico. I specialize in curriculum development, leadership development, and team building programs, as well as strategic planning. Really, I have a vision and a passion for helping organizations build something better together. I'm really into building and fostering communities of practice where people can work better together, better serve customers, and better serve each other, and to really make a measurable difference in the organizations that I serve. I'm really passionate about that. And one of the biggest things to know about me is I'm an owner of a 9-year-old bulldog named Momo. She's the light of my life. She runs my house. And so the weight of my heart is also an English bulldog. But I don't expect you to buy me one. But they are a lot of fun. So again, what I would love to do for you is to really help your organization build something better together, improve your processes, build better teams and leaders for the future. So if you have any questions, I will be sending this as a follow-up, and I will send my contact information out to everybody. And I look forward to seeing you in the future. So thank you for attending my webinar today. And I value every one of you